Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Integrated Management Systems webinar for LRQA. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You may have joined the presentation listening using your computer's speaker system by default. If you would prefer to join over the telephone, just select phone call in the audio pane, and the dial-in information will be displayed. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and go through as many as we can during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. We will be running some of our polls today. Please note the responses are anonymous and the results will only be shared as a percentage on the screen. This webinar is being recorded and we will share a link with everyone who registered in the coming days. It is my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. Our first speaker today is Paul Smith. Paul joined LRQA in 2013 as a management systems trainer who specializes in quality, environmental, and health and safety management systems and process improvement. He's a first-rate communicator who is passionate about promoting quality improvement and supporting clients with his enthusiastic and common sense approach on topics such as risk-based assessment. Before joining LRQA, Paul worked in national and global quality management roles with Philips and NXP Semiconductors. And our second speaker today is Bill Barnes, Auditor Manager at LRQA. Bill is an integrated senior lead assessor working with LRQA since 2005 and involved in ISO 9001, 14001, 45001, and responsible care audits. Bill has over 35 years of manufacturing, engineering, consulting, training, and assessment experience for quality, health and safety, environmental and security aspects in the service and manufacturing industries. In recent years, he has been heading LRQA thought leadership efforts for workplace safety, and through ISO 45001 and ISO 45003, psychosocial safety in the workplace. He is a licensed professional engineer, IRCA, principal auditor, and exemplar global responsible care auditor. Before we get started, it would be useful for Bill and Paul to get a better understanding of our audience today. So we have a couple of quick poll questions. So firstly, what is your organization's approach to integrated management systems? The first response is we have already integrated management system. The second response, we already have an IMS and want to add more standards to it. The third response is we would like to integrate our management systems in the next 12 months. And the fourth response is we don't currently plan to integrate our management systems. We'll give you a moment to answer. We'll give it just another moment. Paul and Bill, would you like to respond?
Sure. It looks like a lot of people are on their way to integrating, so we look forward to engaging with you all this morning and possibly giving you some insights into some ways to go about doing that integration.
Okay, and we'll move on to the second poll. Our second poll today is, which standards are you planning to integrate? ISO 9001 quality and or ISO 14001 environmental management. The second response is ISO 45001 occupational health and safety. The third response is ISO 27001 information security. The The fourth response is ISO 50001, energy management. And the last response is ISO 22301, business continuity. We'll give everybody a moment. And here are the results. And again, Paul or Bill, would you like to comment?
This is very much in line with what we expected, to be honest. 9, 14, and 45 being the traditional 3. Many of our assessors are trained to audit all 3 standards, all 3 of those standards, and then adding in others as we go. So split between information security, energy management, and business continuity. Yeah, pretty much as we expected. Thank you.
I think it also reflects some of the emergent or immediate needs, certainly quality control for many organizations, quality management of for their products, but emerging ESG considerations for organizations. So marrying the 2 of them up, it really makes a lot of sense. It really doesn't surprise us at that very high rate there.
Perfect. Thank you both. We'll now hand over to Paul to start the presentation.
So let's talk about what is an integrated management system. So put simply, it's any system that combines elements to address different ends. So if your management system is designed to protect the customer from faulty product, you've got a quality management system. If you're trying to protect the environment from your operations, you'll have an environmental management system. And if your management system is trying to protect your workers from harm, then it's a health and safety management system. But if your single management system tries to address several of these, then you've got an integrated management system. And other management systems can be integrated into these, such as energy. Next slide. So some popular integrations were integrating an environmental management system with a health and safety management system, partly because, historically speaking, these 2 standards have been aligned for a long time. But since 2014 and the introduction of Annex SL, then there's a lot more commonality between all of the standards. So if you started with a quality management system and wanted to add environmental to it, then that's perfectly feasible. But if you want to integrate all 3 of the common standards, quality, health and safety, and environment, that is also very popular. Other integrations are energy and environment, or quality and information security, or information security and business continuity, or business continuity and risk management. All of these are perfectly feasible since the advent of Annex SL, which we'll have a look at on the next slide. Next slide, please. So since 2014 and the advent of Annex SL, a harmonized structure for all of the ISO standards. Who'd have thought it? The standards bodies have finally standardized how to write a standard. So they have 10 clauses, the first 3 of which set some details and references, but the auditable stuff starts at clause 4. The stuff you need, the requirements that you need to meet start at clause 4. And it all looks very common, but as we'll see, these similarities are often only skin deep. Next slide, please. So if you take clause 7, for example, and look at the subclauses within that, the headings are identical across all of the popular standards, 9, 14, 45, 50. But when you look at it in detail, for example, 7.4, you'll find that communication in 9001 is basically what's in Annex SL, the bare minimum, if you like. Whereas communication in 14,001 is much more extensive. So although the chapter headings are the same, the contents are quite varied. That's because with 14,001, there are probably regulatory requirements that you need to communicate about your environmental management system. But on the other hand, within clause 7, clauses 7.2 and 7.5, very little difference between those requirements. Next slide, please. It's partly because each ISO standard was written by a different technical committee, and they seem to have taken a perverse pleasure in trying to be different from each other. If we take purchasing, for example, the topic of purchasing, within ISO 9001, that's covered in an entire subclause 8.4. But in the environmental standard, you'd have to look very closely in clause 8.1 to find what it says about purchasing. And with the health and safety, it's got a subclause of 8.14. So within your organization, of course, you would cover purchasing just once and be able to tick off all of those subclauses in each of the standards. But you'd have to be very careful to make sure that what you say about purchasing within your management system does indeed tick off what the requirements are in each of those 3 standards. Policy is a good place to start if you want to integrate your different management system standards into a whole. So policy, you'd start perhaps with a quality policy and detail the things that your quality policy has to say, as well as the things that your management think are important for your quality policy. And then compare what your quality policy says against the requirements for a policy in 14001. And you'll find that there are a couple of extras, such as the need to commit to preventing pollution and so on. So you could add those in, and you've now got a policy that addresses 9 and 14. Then you look at what 45001 brings to the party, and there's a few extras in there, such as a commitment to providing a safe and healthy workplace for your workers. So add those in, and you've now got a policy that addresses all 3 standards requirements. But getting this through management is tricky. So what you'd need to do is get buy-in from the different managers within your organizations. So get the quality manager and the EHS manager to go to management and promote their integrated policy. Thank you. Next slide. And over to Bill.
Thanks, Paul. Yes, in the context of having a certified integrated management system, certainly integration is a process for both client and LRQA in these cases. In simplest terms, for us, there are 2 key questions. Is the system integrated, and can we conduct an integrated audit? So if you find positive answers for both of these, let's talk about integrating the certification and all the activities that go along with it. Is the system integrated? With Common Ground in Annex XL that Paul had just talked about, many organizations have developed and implemented common processes and procedures for clauses 4 through 10, where possible or practical, grouping the management of business risks for quality, environmental, and safety to begin with considerations. Before proceeding towards integration, LRQA auditors will examine and determine common elements and effectiveness of the management systems. So we encourage organizations to do the same thing via your internal audit process before committing to a common certification. Not everyone is in place, and management systems are a journey. So it's healthy to have progress, but not completion before contacting LRQA. Things we look for are integrated considerations for risks and considerations for interested parties, common processes for incident management and non-conformity management, integrated auditing, and management reviews where all parties are at the same table. Can we conduct an integrated audit? Interesting topic. LRQA has many integrated auditors across our teams in all continents, including auditors with experience in many industrial sectors in particular. They understand the collective business risks in your industry that integrated systems can and should address. Our auditors have expertise in all 3 of these standards, or many in all the standards that we've been talking about earlier, and often will develop an integrated audit plan to carry out the audit. Proof positive that the system is integrated is produced when it can be audited as integrated. So we typically determine a degree of integration by looking at all these factors I just mentioned. And then looking at the integration of the auditors. Of course, in our business, we strive to have a lot of integrated auditors for most of the combinations Paul had shown you earlier, so that we can bring someone who is fully capable, or a team of auditors who are fully capable, to you. That's how we typically approach it. And your system may not be 100% integrated. None really ever are. So we try to come up with a factor of the integration of the system and capability to audit is how we approach it, and how you should consider approaching it internally. We offer IAFMD 11, a mandatory document. It's available free on the internet. It takes both of these considerations and guides certification bodies like LRQA to determine the degree of integration and discounting on duration. So if you are considering integrating your system and certifying it, please take a look at IAFMD 11, and you'll just see where we're coming from when we're asking some of those questions. You can get a head start on that. We appreciate that up front. Next slide, please. So let's take a look at clauses 4 and 5 for any ISO standard, as there is a lot of common ground here. Is your system focused on what management needs to strategically accomplish? Big question there. So let's start. Context of the organization and interested parties. Consider bringing all your business risks into one focus for leadership. It raises the value of the management system immediately, constructively, and demonstrates awareness of the system at the highest levels in your organization. All right. So consider key strategic business needs. Let's talk briefly about business continuity and sustainability. All the things that top management are focused on right here, right now. Let's start with business continuity. Emergencies, incidents, high risks, influences of interested parties and others on the organization when things are not going right, and its activities are all important elements for effective business continuity planning and delivery. So you've got to be able to respond to anything in an organized fashion. All of your interested parties, in many cases, translation shareholders and investors, are on board. They know that you can course correct. Sustainability and ESG programming, consider reporting needs versus ISO monitoring in place. Our ESG and greenhouse gas reporting analysts see a world of difference when they're gathering information when working with an organization with a certified management system, an integrated management system, because when you talk about ES and G, you're already talking about integrating several of the ISO standards. All of these business needs can and should be addressed through your management system. You know, when integrated, evidence of all of these considerations is very visible and credible, and when demonstrated in a single system where the leadership can demonstrate focus to any interested party. So let's talk about leadership for just a moment here. Leadership, policy, and organizational roles and responsibilities. What we find in clause 5 of many of these ISO standards. A lot of common ground there. That's something that Paul had mentioned just a moment ago. You want to try to ensure that you have alignment with the context of the organization across the leadership team and organizational roles and responsibilities. Create a common framework for defining those roles and responsibilities and accountabilities to align leadership commitments and improvement programs. So we want to get that alignment to support those ESG, oftentimes, goals and expectations. For example, crisis management as part of continuity planning. You want to know that the needs for quality, safety, environmental, information security, food safety, whatever the standards are, in unanticipated events and collectively are being managed in an organized fashion. In the environmental and safety side of things, we call that incident command. What is the chain of command? Who does what? Let's get started and responding when we have events. So you can really see the advantages to context of the organization and leadership in organized roles and responsibilities to produce the greatest focus of your organization to succeed against key strategic demands of your interested parties, including business continuity, resilience, and sustainability commitments. Next slide, please. Let's take a quick look here into monitoring performance in a variety of ways, typically found in Clause 9 of any of these standards, if you're following along. Starting with performance evaluation. Many organizations now manage and communicate KPIs on the floor via common platforms. You see things like, I call them SQUIDIP boards or SQDCM boards, where all of these criteria across all of these business disciplines, they're out there, and you're having a common conversation. We ought to have a common integrated management system around that, because that's where it is, the success is out on that floor. We see these measures a lot out on the shop floors, and why not integrate that system? Keep that in mind, and that's often a driver for performance evaluation. One quick example comes to mind is a common calibration activity. I have a chemical manufacturer that created a calibration program process activities in their maintenance organization for quality aspects. We come along doing our environmental and health and safety 14,001 and 45,001 audit, at the time separately from our 9,001 certification audits. And the question came up, can we use this same process for respiratory protection, confined space equipment, some of these safety critical as alarm systems and things like that? Can we use those common practices and that's that common tool? The next time we came along for the audit, we found all of that is in one common process, regardless of the business risk. If it's instrumentation and it's relevant to the management system and the risks, regardless of whether it's quality, environmental safety, they're all in that common process. So that's one of the advantages where you can really just put it into play. The other is internal audit, certainly. Having enough auditors to carry out management systems examinations is a growing challenge in every industry. A smaller integrated team is more likely to survive in today's resource-stricken environments, if I could put it kindly. Common pools of auditors often examining common processes could help you deliver on audit schedules. One concern that we see a lot of issues with now. You could save time in delivering on audits, bottom line. You can continue to plan to use subject matter specialists, but now with very focused inquiries and feedback to be readily addressed. So common auditors can pull in subject matter, whether it is somebody on a quality aspects, anything in particular on workplace safety, anything particular on environmental protection in this case, if it's information security or food safety or what have you on your integration. Pull those people in for very focused conversation. They're going to do their best work when they're focused on that technical aspect and then get you back into integrated audits. So you should leverage those resources to assure performance is delivered, and you can be measured for success using common measures for all known risks. Next slide, please. So Paul spoke a little bit about some of these clauses, the heart of a management system. This is the engine and the transmission and the wheels on a management system. Planning for risks, clause 6.1 looks for different results across ISO standards. Planning for different risks in each discipline that you might have, for example, quality, safety, or environmental. consider the basic wording of quality in ISO 9001. It's focused on risks and opportunities. And then take any of your other planning for risks methodologies, aspects and impacts and environmentals, HIRAs in safety, process safety or hazard analyses and safety, and so forth and so on. Every standard kind of has their tried and true work methods. But think about it in those basic words of risks and opportunities, and that's how you can build integrated approaches. You might have standalone assessments for different disciplines, but you're striving for the same end effect. So we always say, try starting with your 9001 there and incorporating the others. Certainly with resources, as Paul mentioned, there's a lot of common ground. For most of that, again, if I use 9001 language, I'm talking about people, infrastructure, and work environment, or environment for operations, they like to call it. Think in those contexts, regardless of what standard, and possibly integrating clause 7 for the most part in your system. You look at things like clause 7.1.5 in 9001 starts to get into very specific arrangements for monitoring and measuring resources. Look at that, and I often suggest to folks, think of that in the context of some of your other standards. What's needed to measure and how accurate is that measurement? That's been at the heart of 9001 for decades. If you want to have good data and information in whatever risks you're trying to manage, take that foundation, apply it to your other standards. And then finally, operational control versus requirements for products and services, as 9001 likes to call it. Yes, I think clause 8 is an area where these standards kind of have some common ground, but really depart into what they need to be doing. They are at the heart of the success of any management system, and a lot of your work when you focus around clause 8 operations should be specific to your work activities and the discipline that you're looking to control risks for. They can be quite different, but often can have common ground. I think, Paul, in our planning discussions on this issue, you shared some insights on some of the specifics on common and unique challenges, I think with operational controls and operating procedures. Could you care to share with us a little bit on that?
Sure. What I say is that every standard that's built upon Annex SL will have a clause 8.1, but it's what comes after 8.1 where you get specific to the standards. So with the environmental management system, you've got 8.2, emergency preparedness. With energy, 8.2 is design. With health and safety, it's incidents and preparing for emergencies like that. So you have to be careful. If your quality manual is written clause by clause against the standard, you immediately hit a problem as soon as you get to clause 8.2, because it is 8.2 for quality, 8.2 for environment, or 8.2 for energy. So you have to have some way of differentiating those. But yeah, every standard will have an 8.1, and it's what comes after that, 8.1, but specific to the standards you're looking at.
Great. Let's go to the next slide, please. How to implement in IMS, and where to get started. Starting from point 0. Certainly, just kind of bring us back around what we've been talking to for a while here is identify common interests, process, and consider your organizational roles and responsibilities here. Build from a framework that starts with context and interested parties. Look at ISO 9001 first. I think I mentioned that a couple times. It's got a long history with the Annex SL format and a lot of thought put into it. Integrating from separate systems or certifications, if that's where you're at. Certainly review parallel activities for common interest and delivery is always recommended. Integrate your internal audit activity. I think that's been mentioned a few times. Does it work within the organization? You may struggle to conduct integrated audits. It may mean that your system is not ready to integrate. Think about that. Toss in your ESG considerations to the discussions to see if that kind of brings parties together. You start to get harmonies, particularly environmental, workplace safety, some of those social aspects that you're evaluating in ESG disciplines, things related to your product, could be some quality aspects as well there. Ask your registrar for integrated audits. Get insights to what works, what might work. We have that conversation, auditors, all the time with companies. We still carry out audits with many organizations where one auditor comes for 9,000, another one comes for environmental, another one comes for food safety, another one comes for safety. They have 6 audits with us a year. Well, it might be good for business, but boy, who has all that time for auditing? There might be some activities that keep in mind that you just do better on their own. I think we talked here in both of us in clause 8, and for your organization. And it's okay to walk back from integration when it makes sense. That is another point that we often see is companies think they're going to go to 100% integration. It starts to, teeter and totter a little bit when it's fully integrated, or you don't have the right subject matter expertise keeping an eye on particulars for any one of those disciplines. We've seen companies lose a little bit of traction overall, or things get a little too blurred. So keep that in mind. All right, next slide, please. One of the questions that we often get with small and medium organizations, limited resource environments, are what are some of the things that you should be doing? We always recommend to keep your management system lean and purposeful. What do you really need to do? And how do you really need to achieve it? To what degree is it centrally managed versus something spread across many sites? We see some very effective centrally managed or centrally provided management systems where everything that sites that are part of a multi-site system, even a small organization, can leverage and have that simplicity and a lean and purposeful management system. Use your resources wisely, act on those resources to tackle, the many system support needs. Paul mentioned a lot about clause 7. A procedure on how to write a procedure. I've always loved that procedure when I do audits. You should not have more than one of those in your organization. If you have more than one, you're speaking in more than one language, so consider that. Cross-train people for quality, environmental, and safety and other risks that you may be managing. Work at that. Once you have some integrated processes, you have a common language that these people can speak, and you have greater resilience when you lose any particular talent. So keep that in mind. Integrate your internal and your certification audits. I think we've mentioned that a number of times. That's a great way for small to medium businesses. We see that if there's an integrated people and we can send an integrated audit into an environment to speak with an integrated management systems leader, it's great. We've all been there where we send in a team of 3 people and there's one person on the other end, and it's okay. Auditor A gets them 9 to 11 a.m., Auditor B gets 11 to 2 and lunch, and then Auditor 3 gets them from 2 to 4 p.m., right? Now, it's not going to happen, and that's one of the things that we always are cognizant of, and you should be when planning for small and medium-sized organizations. Expand the scope on any of your procedures, as Paul had mentioned. Can they be QEHS procedures, integrated operating procedures? You have far fewer procedures as part of your management system overall. Next slide, please. Just kind of in summary, we we at LRQA, we see very clear benefits from companies in implementing an integrated management system that features a number of ISO standards for sure. It's an effective measurement or mechanism rather for companies to manage their risk profile in an integrated way across different aspects of their activities, such as service delivery, environmental footprint, or health and safety considerations of their workforce. It allows companies to easily link their strategic objectives to their operations, as we've demonstrated in this presentation, and it has brought in the right foundations for building an integrated management system, or there you're going to be successful. The time and effort and activity required to implement additional standards is significantly lower, with the returns far outweigh the investment. So perhaps, Paul, anything else that you'd like to add in summarizing what we've been talking about?
Well, like you say on the final bullet, don't forget that we offer integrated management system training. And the key focus of our IMS training is to try and avoid auditors sticking to their favorite topic. So we want people who used to be quality auditors and environmental auditors and health and safety auditors to come along to the integrated training, where we stress don't fall back and just audit your own topic. If you've got integrated procedures where not only does it tell you how to do the job and produce quality output, but how to do it safely and how to do it whilst minimizing waste on the environment, and you've got an integrated procedure, then you can audit it with an integrated auditor.
Great. Well, I think now we've got a poll question or two for the audience. We'll take a look at those and come back and talk about what you think.
What elements of your management systems are or could be integrated? The first response is context of the organization and expectations of interested parties. The next is leadership accountabilities, commitments, and business risks. Supporting activities such as competence and awareness or documented information. Monitoring of objects, targets, and other performance indicators. And the last is internal audit, audit activities, auditors, and audit plans. We'll give everybody a few moments to respond. Okay, we'll show the results now. And Paul or Bill, would you like to respond?
Sure. Certainly, we've been talking about context and expectations as a foundation, as a place to start. It doesn't surprise us there. Accountability, commitments, and business risks. Yeah, if you've got an integrated mindset, you're going to stand to succeed. So I can see some of those being a major part. Competence, awareness, documentation, other things. All of this just indicates some of the key things we think folks are kind of on the right path here.
Okay, perfect. We'll move on to our next poll. Will your organization be looking for any of the following services in the next 12 months in relation to integrated management systems? The first response is training. The second response is gap analysis. And the third response is certification. And again, we'll give everybody a few moments to respond. And we'll show the results. And Paul or Bill, if you'd like to respond.
Sure. So heartening to see that training comes out high on this. We're here for you. We have integrated management systems training. We've got one which covers the 3 standards, 9, 14, and 45. But we've recently been asked to add in 50,001, the energy management system, into our integrated management system training. So we now have a 4-standard training course to cover that, as well as other courses that just look at combined systems of combined 9 and 14, 14 and 45, 9 and 45, and so on. We have lots of combined internal audit training courses, as well as those fully integrated 3 standard and now the 4 standard ones.
And then certainly on the delivery side here at LRQA with auditing, gap analyses, we do encourage them. We can come in and kind of take that look kind of off cycle from a certification activity. Sometimes, as I mentioned earlier, there's parallel certifications with someone like LRQA, and an organization wants to say, hey, are we there yet? Can we have an integrated certification? Why not try a gap analysis with us, see where that's at? Well, we just had a conversation with an organization a few weeks back, and that's the way that they're going. And then it's a few months ahead of their next planned audit visits for different standards, and they're better educated to say, are we prepared for it? So great.
Okay, perfect.
Okay,
Thanks
we'll
for
take
taking
on.
part in the polls, and we'll now start the Q&A session. So gentlemen, if you wouldn't mind turning on your
Sure.
cameras.
Yeah.
Paul, we'll come
Yep.
to you first. Oh, I
Go ahead.
apologize. We've
Yep.
had a couple of questions relating to risk. The first question is, we have an IMS, but the risks are handled separately, which is making it quite labor intensive. Is there an easier way to integrate these because the standards are quite specific in terms of what is required for risk?
Sure. The whole purpose of having a management system is to manage risk. And so this is best manifested in clause 6.1, as Bill was saying earlier, where we talk about the risk to product quality. They just call them risks and opportunities in the 9001 standard. In the 14001, they get more specific about risks, namely the aspects and impacts for ways your organization interacts with the environment and the risk it poses to the environment. And obviously health and safety risks, we know about the hazard identification and so on. So trying to integrate those will not be easy, but it's certainly feasible, because at the end of the day, you have certain activities. These are your processes, and each process brings with it risks to final product quality, risk to the environment, risk to health and safety. So integrating them and thinking about them in a single approach is a good way of doing this. And obviously you're going to have you don't have to, but if you've got a risk register, quite often with health and safety, people have a risk register. And so thinking about a risk register and adding in business risk, so address the quality stuff, and environmental risks to address the environmental 14001 standard, it's perfectly feasible to have an integrated business risk register, an integrated risk register that addresses all of those. The way you come at them is slightly different. The way you approach your environmental risk is looking at where your interactions are with the emissions to land, emissions to water, and so on. Whereas health and safety, you're looking at the activity and how does it harm, how could it harm people? But at the end of the day, you end up with a risk register, and don't forget opportunities as well. It's no longer satisfactory just to have a risk register. You should have a risk and opportunities register in order to be able to address these things. It's not mandatory, but it's the approach I often see adopted. Hopefully that answers your question.
Perfect, Paul. Thank you. The next question is, risk assessment in ISO 14001 is quite unique with its aspects and impacts assessment. How does risk work within an IMS when combined with other standards such as ISO 9001, 14001, 45001, and 27001?
Okay. Well, I think we kind of touched a bit on that during the presentation, and I was talking about clause 6.1 there. That's kind of common ground, starting with that 9001 foundation. At its basics, what are risks? What are opportunities? How do I identify them? There was made mention of possibly having some common way of putting your risk matrix together, likelihood and severity, and putting these very different business risks considerations on the same platform, bringing those people into one equation, so to speak. It's a bold move, but it's an integration where you're never going to go backwards. So that's one way in which people might think aspects and impacts are something very, very unique. I've seen many organizations harmonize aspects and impacts logs with hazard and risks logs and JHAs and things like that on the safety side against quality and other aspects. I think it was mentioned 27,001, some of the information security. Yes, the one warning I have is keep things separated until you have a certain level of maturity so that you don't wash away important risks and opportunities in any one of those disciplines. So we don't encourage integrated systems kind of out of the gate for organizations. I think it's certainly where are you on the maturity spectrum? A little bit introspective there.
Okay,
Evolution.
perfect. Oh, thank you. The next question, I believe this one is for Bill. ISO has announced the inclusion of climate change requirements to a number of its management system standards. Can you tell us a bit more about this and what it might mean for integrated management systems?
Yeah, this is where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. One of the new, if anyone's heard of a new requirement, it goes across over 30 management system standards, takes effect today, February the 29th of 2024, and it's dialed in primarily in clause 4.1 and 4.2, understanding the organization and its context and the needs and expectations of interested parties. And really at this point in time, what the kind of international collective community for the ISO standards states that in understanding the context, an organization shall determine whether climate change is a relevant issue. There are many ways in which you can determine whether climate change is a relevant issue. There are some guidance. We have guidance documents we can make available to anyone here on our ways to go about looking at that. We have a white paper and some other public-facing documents that have gone out to our entire client base at this point. If you haven't already received it, we can get it to you. Understanding the needs and expectations of interested parties. Relevant interested parties can have requirements related to climate change, whether it's a product related requirement, whether it's a service related requirement, more and more of a transparency of ESG considerations is coming about there. It drives organizations to talk to those various interested parties a little bit more. As we do any auditing in any of these disciplines, we're seeing more and more conversations about those kinds of interested parties and the needs of them. And I always go back to the notion of when people have sustainability reporting to accomplish, those that have management systems in place, it's pretty straightforward opportunity. I will say my experience, those that don't have management systems in place, collecting information for various sustainability ESG considerations is hard work. The first thing that people say is, I wish I had a management system. So look forward to that information. It is relevant. It is effective as of today, and it goes across 30 or more management system standards. Doesn't change the standards. No new certificates need to be in place. It kind of sets a baseline. So as any of these standards go to their next natural revision in their cycle, there'll probably be a broader context of what the expectations are individually.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. And because of the technical delays, we'll go just ever so slightly over maybe about 5 minutes. So I'll move on to the next question.
Sure.
The next question is, I believe, for Paul. Is it better to prepare for the internal collaborators training programs concerning the integrated management system, or is it better to carry out training programs focused on the single specific management systems, such as quality, safety, environment, etc.?
It depends on who your target audience is. If you're trying to train up internal auditors, then train them in an integrated fashion. But if they're, yeah, it depends who you are training. So yeah, integrated training is better because you instantly get sort of 3 for the price of 1 if you train a person looking at all those different aspects whenever they do whatever job you've got them doing. In terms of nope, I think that'd be my answer. For example, calibration. If you've got calibration engineers, then you train them up in the calibration procedure, because calibration is covered in all of the standards in clause 7.1.5 in the quality standard, but it's also covered in 9.1 of the environmental standard. It's covered in clause 6.6, I think, in the energy standard. So it's covered in different places in different ways, but it's still covered in all of the standards. So, and that goes for most of the aspects. If you're looking at a risk, it's covered in the standards and so on. So whatever you've got the person doing, when you train them, it's perfectly feasible to train them in an integrated style.
Perfect. Thank you, Paul. And I believe this next one is also for you. What are the consequences of not integrating the systems?
Oh, okay. So yeah, that's an interesting point. You're in the wrong webinar if you don't want to do that. But really, the consequences of not integrating your systems, basically you're losing out on a lot of savings, because you can save things. You don't need 3 sets of internal auditors. If you've got an integrated system, you only need 1 set of internal auditors who can audit all 3. Also, in terms of, well, it's just you end up with duplication if you don't integrate. So because all the standards, the level of duplication is a lot more evident now that all the standards follow the same format. So if you look at your documentation requirements, you wouldn't have a separate documented system for your 14,001 management system compared to your 9,001, because once you've covered something in a document, you've got it for both standards. You wouldn't need a separate document control system. You wouldn't do separate audits if you have integrated. So I think the drawbacks of not integrating are manyfold, whereas for the advantages of integrating are savings.
And
Also,
so many organizations are consolidating their team and wearing more hats, as we say it, and it gets harder to kind of have standalone parallel opportunities. I think I don't know, Paul, is it easier to sell an integrated management systems training course because management sees their team as wanting to collaborate and integrate, and maybe if I put these people in front of an educated individual, something happens?
but also it's development for your people as well. So if they're already a quality auditor, they want to develop into be able to audit the other standards as well. You get a lot of advantages that way.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Great.
We'll do one more question, if that's all right.
Sure.
It looks like this one is for Bill. We have an integrated question sheet where disparate sections of the standards, but covering similar queries, are lumped into one question, drawing on each standard. Will the new overlapping layout be introduced soon?
The new overlapping layout. Well, there isn't necessarily an overlapping layout of the standards. I don't envision, or I'm not aware of, an integrated management system standard. I think there's enough need for the specifics interests to have that. But certainly the approach is great. You know, there is a lot of common ground, and doing integrated audits. You know, we don't run off of a checklist or a questionnaire. Our auditors, we don't run off of the individual standards. We run off of experience and expertise into how and where things should be integrated. I take great pride that a lot of our core standards auditors are integrated and can talk to those different but common interests.
Perfect, thank you. And I believe that brings us to the end of the webinar. Thank you both, Paul and Bill.
You're welcome.
And thank you to everyone for attending today's webinar. Once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we would appreciate if you would complete that and provide your feedback. On behalf of LRQA and our presenters, thank you so much for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.